We are in week number 2 of a Christmas series, and we decided this year to preach Christmas a little bit different. We're preaching through one of the most popular Christmas movies that a lot of you have probably seen different versions of. It's a movie called A Christmas Carol. I almost say A Christmas Story. That's a different movie, maybe in the next few years, but we're looking at this movie called A Christmas Carol, one of the most beloved Christmas stories of all time, and taking some time as we enter into this Christmas season to talk about really the plot line of this story that is powerful, because really the story is just a depiction of what the gospel does in our lives. This is a story written by Charles Dickens. It was written in 1843, and it's one of the most beloved Christmas stories there are. Since it was written, it has been adapted over 100 different times into different formats, different plays, different musicals, different movies, and we made the controversial decision that we've heard from some of you on. We picked the Muppet Christmas movie because we as a staff, that's about our maturity level, okay? We need the Muppet version of the Christmas story so that it really sinks in. And so we're watching this movie, but really the reason we want to talk about this movie is not to talk about the movie, and really when Charles Dickens wrote the movie, he's giving a depiction of what the Christmas story is all about. That this is a story of a villain, probably one of the most well-known villains in all of literature, a man named Ebenezer Scrooge, his well-known tagline, "Bah humbug." And we watch this movie, and in the course of an hour and a half, you see a villain turn into this man who, at the end of the story, his life has been transformed because he finally understands what Christmas is all about. It's a story that takes a man, and this is the way that he's described at the beginning of the story, that Ebenezer Scrooge was a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. And by the end of this movie, he's turned into a new man. He's turned into a man who moves from misery to abundance, from loneliness to enjoying his family, from being hopeless to being hopeful. And so we're watching this movie, and as Scrooge interacts with these three ghosts, the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and yet to come, really what we're doing is looking at a story of transformation, and hopefully it gives us hope as well, that wherever we are in life and whatever life looks like for us, for our loved ones, the gospel is this story of transformation that, just like in the life of Ebenezer Scrooge, Christ comes in and changes us from the things that we were into all that God has for us to be. So last week, Blake kicked it off, and we looked at the Ghost of Christmas Past. We looked at the lessons that the Ghost of Christmas Past had for Scrooge about dealing with his past so that he could move forward and not be chained to it. Today, I get to talk about a little bit more friendly ghosts. In fact, when we watched the movie, I was very excited. The ghosts of Christmas past and yet to come are a little bit creepy. My ghost is really jolly. He's happy. He's excited. I get to talk about the ghosts of Christmas present. And so I want you to watch a clip from the movie, and then we're going to talk about this morning what it looks like for us to learn from this ghost and learn what it looks like to be present. So take a look at this real quick. So here is my fear for us this week. I don't know what you have in front of you this week. I know we've got traveling to see family and going to different towns, and I have a literal checklist of who's got what gift and making sure they all got the right gifts, and I'm a to-do list person and a chart person, so I've actually got a chart to make sure everybody's got the right gifts, and we know that they're wrapped and under the tree. And it can be that time that we try to get through and make sure that everybody gets what they need and has the right things under the tree. And my fear for us is really what the clip of the movie was all about. That we can spend all of our time trying to survive, and we can spend all of our time trying to get past it, only to look back and realize that we sped through something that God wanted us to slow down in and really enjoy the moment. See, the lesson from the ghost to Scrooge was really teaching him how to be present. He was teaching him how in his life it was so easy for him, because of his greed, because of his love for money, to not value the most important things in his life, which were time and people, over the finances and the material things that he had. And so as we jump into this week, and whatever this week looks like for you, I want to talk this morning about what it looks like to be present. That's the title of my sermon, is Be Present. If you have a Bible, I want you to go ahead and open up with me to Luke chapter 19. But I don't want us to get through the Christmas season and look back and realize that we survived and we made it and everybody got what they needed, and we neglected really to do the most important things that God has for us to do in this week of Christmas. So we're going to be in Luke 19 here in a moment and talk about what it looks like to be present. I was looking this week, there's a Harvard study that convicted me, because I know when I read the numbers, it's true of me as well. There's a Harvard study that says 47% of the time that our minds and our hearts are not where our bodies are. 47% of the time. So half the time, whether it's half of us or half the time for each of us, half the time our minds and our hearts are not where our bodies are, which is pretty convicting. It means that when we're in conversations, half the time we're not really there. We're physically there, but we're not emotionally, mentally, spiritually there. That when we are sitting around the dinner table, we may physically be there, but mentally and spiritually and emotionally be 1,000 miles away. That when we're even here at church, we may be here physically, but it's possible to be in a place physically, but to not be where our bodies are. And what I want to talk about today is that as people who struggle with that we struggle to be present, that half of our lives can be spent physically in a place, and yet spiritually and emotionally and mentally somewhere far, far different. I want to talk about what it looks like for us to be present. See, this is what Christmas is all about, right? Beyond all the other things that get involved in this is the story of a God who chose to be present with us. In fact, this was the announcement of the angels that we just sang about. This is from Matthew chapter 1, verse 20 through 23. Listen to what the angel tells Joseph when they announce the birth of Jesus. He says, "But as he," and he is Joseph, "considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, 'Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife. For that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son. You shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. All this will take place to fulfill what the Lord has spoken by the prophets. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel,'" which means, what does it mean? God with us. Right, this present tense announcement that the God of creation, the God who has always been distant and far away, is about to step into history to be Emmanuel, God with us. And I love that the word present means three things, and it's really what I want to talk about today. The word present, it means here in this physical location. So there's a part of the word present that's talking about here. The word present means now, so in this very moment, and it also means a gift. Right? And really, when we talk about what it means to be present, and when the angel makes that announcement to Joseph about what Jesus is coming to do, that the God is going to give humanity the present of stepping into the here, stepping into the now, not being a God who's distant and far away, but being a God who steps into the course of our daily lives and lives life with us, a present God in our lives. And so I want to talk about the celebration of that this Christmas, and then really the takeaway from that is that we as the people of God now get to be the people who go and bring God's presence with us wherever we go. So Christmas is not just that God came to us and visited the earth for a few years. The story of Jesus is that he came and paid for our sins and washed us clean so that the Holy Spirit of God can now take up residence in us, and so that everywhere we go as individuals, that people should be able to see and feel that God is present in the here and now because his people have stepped into the earth and carried on his mission of who Jesus is. And so I want to look at Luke 18 and 19. There's a couple stories in here that even when I talk about being present, I want to make that really, really tangible for us. What does it look like at Christmas when your family's here to be present with them? What does it look like when loved ones come to town? And I'm guessing that some of your loved ones are genuinely loved ones. I'm guessing some of your loved ones, you love them, but you may not necessarily like them all the time, right? Anybody? No one raised their hand. Okay, good. You're all much more holy and spiritual than me. There may be people that are coming into your life this week that you just have to pray and prepare for the role that God has for you, but it's not going to be easy. And so I want to talk about what it looks like for us to be here and now, to be the presence of God. And one of the most striking qualities about the way that Jesus lived his life was that no matter who he interacted with and no matter what he was doing, he was always present in the moment. Right? The human who came to the earth with the most important to-do list ever, the most important mission that would ever be lived out, he was never too busy for the people that he interacted with. And so one of the qualities that strikes me when I look at his life, Jesus lived with what I would call an undivided attention in the moment. Even though he came to carry out this cosmic mission from God to redeem and reconcile humanity, he lived with this undivided attention in the moment for everybody that he interacted with. So I want to read these two stories. I want you to see this lived out. This is in Luke chapter 18. There's two back-to-back stories in Luke 18 and 19, and we get to see what it looks like to be present in the person of Jesus, who was on his way to the cross, and yet that the being on the way to the cross, that cosmic mission that he was about to carry out, didn't stop him from stopping for people who needed him to stop for them. So look with me, Luke chapter 18. I'm going to begin in verse 31, because I want you to see where this story picks up. It says, and taking the 12, he said to them, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, And everything that is written about the Son of Man by the prophets will be accomplished. For he will be delivered over to the Gentiles, he will be mocked and shamefully treated and spit upon, and after flogging him, they will kill him, and on the third day he will rise. But they understood none of these things. The saying was hidden from them, and they did not grasp what was said. Well, what I want you to see is that in Luke's gospel, we are really at the culmination of all that Jesus came to do, and he looks at his disciples, and he finally says, it's time for me to go to Jerusalem to do what I came to do. Right, and this is the point in the story where they begin to make the walk from where they were to the city of Jerusalem, Jesus fully knowing that he was going to Jerusalem to die for the sins of humanity. And now look at what happens along the way. So this is an along the way story that Jesus is going to the cross, to Jerusalem, and on the way, he has these two encounters with these two people that would have been very easy for him to walk by because he was busy. Right? He had something important that he was on his way to do, and yet he stops, and I want you to see that he's present with these people. Look back, verse 35. It says, he drew near to Jericho. A blind man was sitting by the roadside begging, and hearing a crowd going by, he inquired what this means. They told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. And he cried out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And those who were in front of him rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and commanded him to be brought to him. And when he came near, he asked them, what do you want me to do for you? And he said, Lord, let me recover my sight. And Jesus said to him, recover your sight. Your faith has made you well. And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise to God. What does it mean to be present? I want you to write down 3 words. Jesus saw, he stopped, and he spoke. That's what it meant for him to be present. That on the way to the cross, on the way to fulfill the most important mission in the history of humanity, there's a man who's by the side of the road who Jesus could have very easily walked past. He saw him, he stopped for him, and he spoke life into him. This is what it looks like to be present. For Jesus to be present involves seeing someone that many people looked past, stopping for someone that many people were too busy for, and speaking life into a man who desperately needed it. And I love the way it plays out because it says that Jesus saw this man that everyone else walked by. He was a blind man. He was a beggar. He was an annoyance to everybody else in the crowd. And this blind man heard, it says that he heard the crowd. But he knew something was going on and didn't know quite what it was. And so he asked the people, what's going on around me? I can hear the chaos. I can hear the people. And someone says, Jesus of Nazareth is about to walk by. And so this blind man, really out of desperation, just begins to cry out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And he begins to cry out so much so that the people in the crowd are annoyed by him and tell him to be quiet. See, a lot of the disciples even are hearing this going on, and they know that Jesus has just announced he's going to Jerusalem, he's going to the cross. And so the man is crying out, and he's annoying everybody, and they tell him to be quiet. But the man refuses to listen. And in fact, it says that he cries out more, and he cries out louder. And finally, he gets to this place where it says that Jesus sees him, and Jesus hears him, and Jesus stops. And now Jesus is annoyed at the people who are annoyed at him because they've told him that this man doesn't matter. This man has been sitting there begging for years and years and years, and Jesus is on his way to the cross. He's got important things to do. And Jesus stops, and he looks at this man, and I want you to see that the disciples are annoyed. They rebuke him. Jesus, they don't think, has time for this guy because Jesus is too important, and he's too busy, and he's going somewhere really important, and he's got an agenda, and this guy is really an interruption to all that Jesus has got going on. But Jesus doesn't see it that way at all. In fact, Jesus rebukes them for rebuking him, and he walks up to the man, and I want you to notice a similar question than we saw last week. He walks up to this man who's crying out for him, and he asks the question, do you want to be healed? Right? He says, what do you want me to do for you? Right? This obvious question. What do you? The blind man who's been sitting there begging and crying out for years, he's crying out for Jesus. Pretty obvious what he wants. And once again, just like we saw last week, Jesus walks up to him and he says, what do you want? What do you want for me to do? And the man just cries out and he states it directly, Lord, I want you to let me recover my sight. See, once again, just like we saw last week, Jesus walks up to a man fully knowing what he wants, but he's waiting for this man to express it. Jesus is not annoyed by this man crying out for him. Jesus is honored by it. Jesus is not looking at him, wanting him to be quiet. Jesus is looking at him saying, I want you to express directly what you want me to do for it, and I'm happy to do it for you. And so it says that he cries out that he wants his sight to be restored. Jesus stops and commands him to be brought to him. And then Jesus just begins to speak words of life to this man. It says that he looks at him and answers this strange, obvious question. But he wants to have this conversation with him where the man knows that I see your needs and I hear that you cried out for me. And in your desperation, I hear you and I'm going to act on your behalf that I may meet you where you are. So it's this amazing truth of Jesus on the way to the cross. He sees a man that everyone else walked past. He stops and spends time with the man that everyone else is too busy for, and he speaks life to a man that's desperately in need of it. That's what it looks like to be present. And if it wasn't once enough, look, verse 19, or chapter 19. We get a contrasting guy. Chapter 18 is a blind man. Chapter 19, we meet a guy that you probably remember from Sunday school, a man named Zacchaeus. Who was Zacchaeus? A wee little man. Okay, all the church people are in the room. All right, Zacchaeus was a wee little man, but look at what happens. He goes from a blind man who needs his sight recovered. Then look at Luke chapter 19. It says, he entered Jericho and was passing through. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. So notice he goes from a poor man, a beggar, someone who was blind and sitting begging for money every day, to a wealthy man who was really hated by his society because of his occupation. It says he was a tax collector, and he was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was small in stature. And so he ran on ahead. He climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled. He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Do you see the same pattern playing out again? Jesus, on his way to the cross, first for the beggar, he sees him, he stops for him, and he speaks life into him. And then a very different guy, but the same situation, he sees this man named Zacchaeus who desperately wants to see him. He sees him, he stops, and he speaks life into him. Right? Jesus looks at this man named Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus was so desperate to see Jesus that he climbs a tree so that he can get a glimpse of him. Right? His whole hope is that maybe I can, from a tree, look out and even just catch a passing glimpse of this man that I've heard about. And so he's up in a tree, and he's living a life. A tax collector was a social outcast because the tax collectors in their day were not exactly the same thing as the tax collectors in our day. We don't necessarily love tax collectors, but in their day, the tax collectors were Jewish people who had really jumped in with the Roman government to make sure that the Roman taxes were paid. So it was a Jewish man who had really sided with the Romans. And so the Jewish people obviously hated these people for selling out their people and then unfairly collecting taxes from them. And so not only is he a social outcast, he climbs this tree. He's just hoping for a passing glance of Jesus that day. And it says that more than a passing glance, Jesus walks through the town. He sees Zacchaeus up in the tree and walks up to the tree and stops. And not only does he stop, he calls his name, Zacchaeus. See, in a moment, Zacchaeus goes from wondering if he could just catch a passing glimpse of Jesus on his way to Jerusalem, and then slowly he sees this man walking to him, walking to the tree, and it's really kind of this humorous picture of Jesus looking up in a tree, and he just calls out to him, Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus. Not only does he see me, he knows my name. And then he sees him and knows his name, and then this line that he says to him, I must stay at your house today. Not only do I see you, I'm going to stop for you, and I'm going to intentionally go to this place that all the other people are going to really be upset with me for going, because I need to go to your house. There's some things that I need to do for you and with your family that convince you once again that I came for you, that I'm here to be present in your life now. And so we don't get the whole story behind the scenes, but he goes to his house, and for Jesus to be hanging out at the house of a tax collector was this scandalous thing. You can see that by the response of the others. And he stays there and speaks life into him. And you can see that because of what Jesus has done, it says that Zacchaeus repents and begins to say, everything that I've taken, I'll pay back fourfold. Everything that I've done, I want to give my life back to Jesus, and I want to change the way I'm living. And in this moment, because Jesus saw, because Jesus stopped, because Jesus spoke, this man and his household are changed forever. And so I want us to kind of to stop and realize this is what it looks like for us to be present. Right? I don't know what your week's going to look like, but I do know that God is asking you to do those three things. He's asking you to see people that no one else sees. He's asking you to stop and to spend time with people that everyone else is too busy for. And he's asking you to speak life into people that are desperately in need of it. If you'll do those three things this week, if we'll devote ourselves this Christmas holiday to not just get the right gifts under the tree, to not just make sure that the meals are good, to not just make sure that all the details are covered, but take a step back and realize that God is calling us to be present in a way beyond that, that we need to stop and see the people around us and then speak life into them in a very meaningful way. All right, so I want to talk about that for a minute. What does it look like for us to be present? We see, we stop, we speak. All right, this is what it looks like for you and me in the midst of this week. And then really what I want to press into is what keeps us from doing that. Right, it's simple enough to see in the life of Jesus. It's simple enough to admire in the life of Jesus. But what is it that keeps us from seeing people the way Jesus saw people? And what is it that keeps us from stopping people the way that Jesus stopped for people? And what is it that keeps us from speaking life the way that Jesus spoke life? You with me? Because I think, does anybody else need this? Is anybody else like kind of ready for Christmas, but you're also kind of dreading, like, man, some things are going to happen this week that I just have to buckle up and survive the ride? Anybody else? A couple of you nodded, all right? A couple of you are being honest. All right, I want us to walk into this week and walk into Christmas and learn what it looks like to be present the way Jesus would if he were in our shoes. And so what keeps us from being present? Let me give you three things. I'm going to walk through these really quickly, but I want to challenge you this week as you think through and pray through what God has for you. There's three reasons I think we struggle with being present. Number one, we don't see many times because we are blinded by our familiarity. A lot of the times the reason that we don't see what God wants us to see, we are blinded by what has become familiar to us. Another way that I'll say this, it is easy to miss the people that you walk by every day. Right? In those two stories, the two people were people that people were used to walking by every single day, and they kind of knew their stories. They kind of knew what was going on in their life, but nobody had the time to stop and be with them in the way that they needed to be with them. And it is so easy to walk by the people, or to miss the people that you walk by every single day. And so I want to pause here. I think for parents in this room, it is so critical for you this Christmas to not just get your kid a good gift. What your kid needs is for you to be here and now in their lives, meet them where they are, and love them the way they need to be loved. That is so much better than a bike. It's so much better than whatever they want under the tree. They need your presence in their lives. They need to know that you are here and now for them. And it's so easy for us to miss the people that we walk by every single day. It's so easy for us to get exhausted and to get annoyed by the season that we're in, and to kind of go through the motions of life. And we start playing this game that a lot of us are good at, and it's the game called One Day Win. Right? This week it may be 1 week win. When all this is past, then I'm going to be able to rest and be content. And a lot of us played this game on a grander scale called One Day Win. Here's how it looks. One day when I get to high school, then I'm going to be happy and have what I want. One day when I get to college, one day when I get married, one day when I get a house, one day when I have kids, one day when my kids leave the house, right? One day when I get a great job, one day when my kids get out of college, one day when I retire. And a lot of us, do you see how we begin chasing this carrot of one day when, and one day when robs from us today? One day when robs from us the things that God has for me today and the people that I walk past every day that desperately need me to see them, to stop, and to speak life. And so I want to just ask you that you begin to think about this week, are there familiar people in your life that you're going to very easily just walk right past? And maybe have surface level conversations with, maybe be friendly to. Are there familiar people in your life that they're so familiar to you that you're in danger of being blinded by your own familiarity to the moment? There's this line in I love the TV show The Office. And there's this line at the very end of it, the last few episodes. There's a line that Andy Bernard said, and he said it, and it got me. Like, it made me tear up. And Andy Bernard doesn't do that very often. But it's the last few episodes when they're looking back on the whole thing. And Andy Bernard said this, I wish there was a way to know when you're in the good old days before you've actually left them. Andy Bernard, man, that's a brilliant philosopher, right? But that thought is exactly it. I wish there was a way to know that I was in the good old days before I left them. So many of us are trying to survive these days, and we're going to move forward and get past it all and blink and look back. And these moments that we were trying to survive are going to be the moments that God really wanted us to cherish and enjoy and do everything He has for us there. And so don't be blinded by familiarity. What is in front of you right now? I want you to begin to think about that this moment is the most important moment. The person right in front of you is the most important person. And rather than looking around and looking forward and looking back, don't be blinded by your own familiarity. We don't see because we're blinded by our familiarity. We don't stop. And I want us to wrestle with this for a moment. We don't stop because we're burdened by our own busyness. Many of us are incredibly busy, and our busyness becomes something that keeps us from stopping and doing the things that we know we need to do for people. It's so easy to let today's to-do list crowd out the people that God has for us to love on. Right? And I'm a to-do list person. I love a to-do list. I love to mark things off. In fact, I'm the guy who, if I've done it and it's not on my to-do list, I'll write it on my to-do list so that I can mark it off and feel accomplished. But it's so easy to let the tasks that we know we need to do crowd out the people that God has for us to love. Right? And it's the burden of busyness, these things that we take on that are good things that we need to do. When those things begin to crowd out the people that God has called us to love, we have this problem. But see, I think there's a dirty little secret of this. A lot of us like being busy because being busy keeps us from slowing down and hearing the little voices that we hear when we slow down. There's a lot of you that I've talked to that you don't enjoy spending time with God. You don't enjoy slowing down and having a quiet time or devotional time because when you do, things get quiet. And when things get quiet, there are these voices in your mind that you don't want to hear. And what I've tried to encourage you over and over again is that the voices in your mind, that there's some things that are being said to you that the Father in heaven wants to interact with you in, and if you'll actually submit to that, say, God, would you speak to me in this moment? And as I slow down, there's going to be voices that I hear, and I either need to learn how to reject those thoughts and receive your love, or it's possible that you're trying to speak into my life some things that are painful but necessary for me to hear to continue to grow. Right? Busyness becomes this addiction for us, that if I can stay busy in my life, I don't have to slow down. And if I don't have to slow down, I don't have to hear those voices that may be the Spirit of God trying to speak into my life in a specific way. And so saying no to your busyness and stopping in this moment and actually even pausing for a few minutes to give God time and to give others time, it's an act of faith. Because when you slow down and when you stop the busyness, you're going to have to commit yourself to two things. That you're going to slow down and stop being busy. Number one, I'm going to surrender to God a past that I can't change. You're going to have to stop your busyness for a minute and just say, I surrender to God a past that I do not have the ability to change. That's what Blake's sermon last week was all about. That the things in the past are there, but they can hold you captive. And when you stop getting busy and spend time with God, over and over again, He's going to ask you to submit to Him these past things that you cannot change. Then He's also going to ask you to submit to Him a future that you can't control. Right? There's things in the future that you worry about and you worry about and you worry about, and all that worry does is rob you from being present now. And so you have to say no to the busyness and say, listen, I'm going to let go of the things in the past that I can't change. Can't change. I'm going to let go of worrying about things in the future that I can't control, and I'm going to live this moment right now to the fullest. I'm going to do what God has for me to do. I'm going to set aside the to-do list and the checklist and ask God to put in front of me people that I need to stop and spend time with in a way that pleases Him. So we don't stop because we're burdened by our busyness. The third and final one, we don't speak because we're often bridled by our fear. We often don't speak and say the things that God has for us to say because it's just hard to say weird things, right? It's hard to look another human in the eye and say meaningful things. Y'all ever discovered that? Is there ever someone that you know that you need to say something kind or uplifting or encouraging to? Have you ever felt how hard it is to actually get those things out of your mouth? And the females in the room may be better at it than the guys. But there's so many times where I know that there's someone in my life that I need to sit down with, look them in the eyes, and just say a kind sentence. Nothing profound, but hey, you're a good friend, or you're a good dad, or you're a good husband. Have you noticed how hard it is to sit down with another human and say words that give life? And what we have to realize is that we don't speak so often. It's so easy to be with people, but not give them what they need the most, which is our time and our words of affirmation and the things that God puts on our heart, that we need to be the ones that make God's presence here and now obvious in their lives. And that he's asking us not to just be physically present with people, but to be those who speak the words of God and the encouragement of God and the power of God into people's lives. There's something that's, I think, convicted me as a pastor, and it's something that I've wrestled with. I've been a pastor for 20 years, and most of the people that I interact with that are any kind of familiar with Christianity or the Bible, they'll begin to tell me that it feels like God is absent and that he's silent. It's kind of the prevailing thought of most people when it comes to who God is and where he is and what he does. Most people, if they're really honest with me, they tell me they believe in God, but he's a God who feels very distant and feels very absent and very silent in their lives. And I've wrestled with that for a long time, and there's been moments in my life where I've felt that. And it's dawned on me more and more and more that we, the church, are the people that he's asked to be here and now for him. Right, so Jesus came to the earth and was here and now in the physical body. He took on flesh. But the story of Christianity is that when Jesus came and took on flesh, he comes and lives a perfect life and then dies this sacrificial death. And he ascends back up into heaven. And when he ascends, he doesn't say, God is going away and he'll be back in a couple thousand years. That's not the story. He says, God has come. And Jesus has come to live and to wash you clean of all the sin that kept me from taking up residence in you. And the moment you believe, you're washed clean, you're purified so that the Spirit of God could once again live in you, which means that we are the here and now. Do you see that? The story of Christianity isn't Jesus came and now we wait for a couple thousand years for him to come back. The story of Christianity is Jesus came so that the Spirit of God would once again dwell in humanity, that the here and now would be us. And so my conviction is that the world thinks that the church, that God is absent and silent and distant because the church has been silent. Because we haven't taken up our responsibility and this honor to be the ones that carry God with us everywhere we go, that look at people and speak words of encouragement and speak words that they need to hear, that they may know that the God of heaven loves them, that he was sent for them. And so I want to ask you to stand with me. We're going to pray for a little bit. We're going to sing for a little bit. But I want to encourage you. I want this to be a moment, even this morning, where we engage our minds, where we realize that 47% of the time, our minds and our hearts aren't where our bodies are. And even in this moment, that we would stop and just ask God to help us be present now. And that we would look forward to this week. And there's two challenges for you that I have for you this week that I want to pray over us as a people. That this would be a time where in the course of the next week, would you make some time to let God be present with you? Right? If there was ever a time, if there was ever a week in the midst of all the busyness, would you stop all that's going on and invite the God of heaven to be present with you and to speak into your life? See, I noticed in the two stories we read that the common theme was that this blind beggar and this man named Zacchaeus were both desperate. And in their desperation, they cried out, and the God who longs to be present shows up and is present in their lives. And so in this morning and in this next week, will you stop and for 30 minutes a day, just sit and be with God and say, God, this is the story of Christmas, that the God of heaven wants to be present with me here now, that the God of heaven sees me, even if no one else sees me, that the God of heaven stops for me, even if no one else stops for me, that the God of heaven longs to speak words of life into me when I need them most. So would you make some time this morning in this next 20 minutes? And then as you look at this week in the midst of all the busyness, would you carve out time to be present with God? Then the second is this. Not only is the Christmas story about God coming to be present with us, it's about us being God's people and making his presence known wherever we go. And so I want you to begin to think through this week and think through what you've got in front of you. Maybe even begin to ask God, are there some random people, some old friends, some people in my life who need a touch of your presence now? One of the most exciting parts of my daily schedule now, I wake up early and I spend time with God, but I always close that time by asking God, is there someone in my life that needs to be encouraged today? And I've been amazed how many times God will bring someone to mind, and I'll reach out to them, I'll text them or call them, and how many times they needed to hear something from someone on behalf of God. And so this is a great time this holiday season, not only the people that will be around the table with you, but also the people in your phone. If you're like me, I've got like 400 contacts in my phone. There's people that I've had contact with. and giving God permission to bring to mind someone who needs to hear from God and being the here and now gift for God for them today. So, Father, I want to pray around this room for brothers and sisters. Lord, I thank you for this season. Thank you for Christmas and the story of a God who longs to be present with us, who didn't stay removed in heaven, who didn't stay remote, who didn't stay to yourself. But Lord, you took on flesh and came to the earth that we would know you, that we would begin to see what it looks like for you to be present here with us. And so I pray, Lord, that you would help us to be people that are present, that we wouldn't be people that sleepwalk through life. We wouldn't be people who sit at a table with people that we love and not see them and stop for them and have these important conversations with them, that, Lord, that need to happen. And so would you open our eyes? Would you help us to see and to stop and to speak words of life? And Lord, to enter into this Christmas season and let it be all that it is supposed to be. We love you. We give you this time now. Would you be present with us? And Father, would you show us people that you want us to be present with this week?